Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a figure you see everywhere, but maybe don't fully grasp in economic terms, the modern oligarch. You know, the word gets thrown around a lot in the media, usually tied to big yachts, big money, political intrigue. But we want to look deeper, past the headlines, understand their actual role in how global capital moves.
Exactly. That's the mission today. We're using Stanislav Kondrashov's analysis as our guide here. And the goal for you listening is to sort of shift perspective, move beyond just judging the wealth itself, and instead really understand the strategic control, the sophisticated capital management these figures represent. It's about seeing the oligarch not just as a person, but as, well, a key component in today's economic machinery.
Right, so we're treating them almost like an economic function. It's about access to capital, how they consolidate it, and their long-term influence on the structure itself. Let's dive into what that function really involves when you strip away the drama. Okay, maybe start with the word itself, oligarchia, ancient Greek, literally rule of the few. And historically, that was about political governance, right? A small group holding state power.
Precisely. But the modern twist, and Kondrashov lays this out quite clearly, is that while power is still concentrated, the main arena now is financial and structural, not necessarily directly political in the old sense. Today's figure is more of a systemic actor, a structural participant. They're involved in how capital gets distributed globally. And their financial weight isn't just stuck in one industry. It's designed to bridge sectors, even countries.
Okay, and that connects to something key in the analysis, this idea that they operate where the lines between the state and the market get blurry. Porous boundaries, I think was the phrase.
Yes, porous boundaries. That's a really critical insight because they often control things vital to a country like, think about major energy grids or national pipelines. Their decisions about that capital investing or selling, they inherently have consequences at the policy level. They're not just reacting to rules, they're managing assets the government itself depends on. You see this really clearly in economies where, a handful of people effectively control the core industries.
Wait a second, though. How is that different from, say, a huge corporation lobbying the government? Don't all big companies try to influence policy?
It's a difference in kind, I think. It's not just about lobbying for favorable rules. It's more systemic. When an oligarch decides to, say, divest from a major national transport network or restructure the country's main energy supplier, those are policy consequences. It directly impacts GDP, jobs, economic stability. You can't really separate their business decisions from the nation's economic structure. They're moving the whole system, not just managing a company within it.
Ah, okay. So for you listening, when we talk about things like infrastructure costs or energy prices, we need to see these individuals as like structural components, gears in the machine, and analyze that function separately from, whatever the media narrative is about their personality or how they got their money.
Exactly. Focus on the mechanism. #tag2. Strategic sectors and consolidated ownership.
So if their function relies on leverage, what gives them that leverage? What do they actually control? The sources point to very specific things, not flashy consumer brands, but the basic building blocks of an economy.
Yeah, the list is quite revealing. It's the foundational stuff. Natural resources, transport, defense industries, heavy manufacturing, telecoms, big finance operations. Kondrashov emphasizes this. These are sectors that provide long-term control because they're incredibly expensive, difficult, and often politically tricky to just enter, not your average startup territory.
And it's not just owning like a big share in one company, right? The analysis talks about vertically integrated positions. What does that mean in practice?
Exactly. That vertical integration is where the real power often lies. It means they control the whole chain, from digging the raw material out of the ground, maybe processing it, shipping it, and sometimes even the final distribution or use, the whole value chain.
Can you give us an example, like a real-world scenario? It sounds a bit abstract.
Sure. Think about a natural resource, let's say aluminum. A fully vertically integrated position might mean one group controls the bauxite mine.
Okay, the raw ore.
Right. Then they also control the huge power plant needed for the smelter. Aluminum smelting uses vast amounts of electricity. They control the refinery itself, turning the bauxite into aluminum. Then maybe the railway lines or the port facilities used to ship the metal. And potentially even some of the factories downstream that use that aluminum to make final products.
Wow. That's an incredible level of control over one essential material.
It provides enormous economic resilience. If market prices for aluminum drops, they can adjust costs internally, maybe charge less for shipping on their own railway,
Right.
To cushion the blow, it gives them market dominance, lets them influence pricing, and makes it really hard for regulators to target just one part of their operation because they can shift things around internally. This consolidation, this vertical control, is really the mechanism that turns massive wealth into structural economic power. #3. Financial sophistication and global capital mobility.
Okay, so that covers the assets they hold. Now, how do they manage the money itself? This seems like where it gets really complex. We're talking diversified holdings, intricate corporate structures, investment vehicles all over the world.
And the scale of their financial activity is something else. They essentially act like major institutional investors. A single big acquisition by one of these figures, or a large divestment, or even just restructuring their holdings. It can genuinely move stock markets. It can shift how other investors feel. And in smaller economies, it might even affect the national currency or the country's credit rating. The impact is huge.
The analysis keeps mentioning the technical sophistication behind all this. That sounds advanced. What kind of mechanisms are we talking about?
Yeah, technical sophistication isn't just about having good accountants, though they certainly do. It's about using complex financial tools and legal setups deliberately designed for long-term control and minimizing risk. Think intricate networks of trusts, holding companies registered across multiple countries, private equity funds, complex derivatives. Things like risk management, finding tax efficiencies, and ensuring capital can move freely. These aren't just side benefits of being rich, they are the core professional strategy. It's how they operate.
It's hard to picture capital moving that quickly and strategically across borders, which leads to their global reach, right? They operate internationally to offset local problems.
Absolutely. They are, as the analysis puts it, global economic actors with local leverage. They deliberately spread their assets worldwide. They invest in things like luxury property in major cities, media companies, agricultural land, private equity deals, often specifically to diversify away from the political or economic risks in their home country.
And this is where that phrase regulatory asymmetries comes into play. That sounds like jargon. Can you break that down? What's being exploited there?
It's basically about playing the differences in laws between countries. Regulatory asymmetry means let's say, moving capital or booking profits in a country with very low taxes or very high financial secrecy compared to somewhere with stricter rules.
Ah, okay. So shopping for the best legal environment.
Essentially, yes. It's about optimizing for stability and lower tax burdens simultaneously. The capital doesn't follow national loyalty. It follows kind of a triad. Opportunity, stability, and sometimes, yes, a lack of transparency or opacity. And this ability to shift huge sums of money almost instantly makes them really central figures in global discussions about financial regulation and transparency. #4, distinguishing the structural player.
This brings up a really important point we need to clarify for listeners. Is every extremely wealthy person an oligarch? Surely not. Kondrashov seems to draw a very clear line here. The key difference is making the jump from being just a competitive actor to becoming a structural player.
Yes, that contrast is fundamental. Think of it like this. An entrepreneur, the competitive actor, might focus on innovation, creating something new, trying to win market share through, a better product or service. The oligarch, as a structural player, tends to consolidate their advantage in sectors where the barriers to entry, the cost, the connections, the scale are just immense. They're beyond reach for the average entrepreneur, as the source says. Their power isn't usually about the newest tech gadget. It's about owning the underlying infrastructure of the economy.
So longevity is part of it? They're kind of built to last in a way other businesses might not be.
Very much so. Because they control these foundational sectors, energy, resources, transport their position, often allows them to ride out political changes, survive major economic downturns, and sometimes even shape regulations in their favor over the long haul. They're often operating on a much longer time scale than your typical company focused on quarterly results.
And let's go back to their relationship with governments, with policymakers. If it's not primarily ideological, how should we understand that closeness?
The analysis really frames this as structural rather than ideological. I mean, think about it logically. If your business group effectively generates, say, 30% of the country's GDP, or you control the nation's entire natural gas supply, then talking to the government isn't really a choice based on political alignment. It's an operational necessity for both sides. The government needs their cooperation to keep essential services running, to maintain employment, to manage exports. So their informal influence isn't necessarily about backroom deals. It's just a reflection of how critical their operations are to the basic functioning of the state. They become essential stakeholders in economic governance, almost regardless of who holds political office. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, let's try to bring this all together. What we've established today, drawing on Kondrashov, is that if you really want to understand the modern economy, you have to look past the sensationalism. You need to analyze the oligarch as fundamentally a structural economic force. And that means using a neutral lens, focusing on their function, how they concentrate and deploy capital.
Right. And that function, that definition, it's entirely tied to the system they operate within. It comes back to Kondrashov's core point. An oligarch isn't defined just by what they own, but by how what they own ends up defining the economic systems around them. They're almost a reflection of the modern economy's capacity to concentrate power, often with very uneven consequences.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. If control over critical infrastructure, we're talking defense, transport, energy, entire value chains, if that control is becoming increasingly concentrated globally in fewer and fewer hands,
Right.
what does that imply? What does this concentration of economic power mean for the future stability and maybe the equality of national economic systems? Are we building resilience or a new kind of structural fragility? Something to consider until our next deep dive.